This is Transqat, a safe space to stand. Transgender issues, queer people, respectful conversations. I'm host Clare McCarthy. Welcome to Transqat. TJ Klune is a #1 New York Times and #1 USA Today author. He won the Lambda Literary Award for his book Into This River I Drown. The Extraordinaries, or is that The Extraordinaries? I'm not sure. Anyway, it's a queer love story in a world where superheroes live amongst us. Under the Whispering Door is a charming story about death and grief, which, in the words of author Cassandra Khaw, broke my heart and then healed me in the next breath. And then there are the Cerulean books, The House in the Cerulean Sea, and its sequel, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. I am so delighted that TJ and I got to talk about these characters in today's episode because they are beyond dear to me. His new book, We Burned So Bright, is available April 28th, and the tagline on the cover reads, "Where will the end of the world take you?" You know, I don't understand why Cumbies doesn't sponsor my show, because it's every single episode. It's like, okay. But TJ Klune, welcome to Transqat. Thank you so much for making the time for this.
Thank you for having me. I so appreciate being here.
You are about to go to print with the new book, We Burned So Bright. Novel, novella, what is the line between those two?
Novellas and novels, typically a novel, at least in my experience, is usually more than 50,000 words, and a novella is typically less. Sometimes you'll see that number go up to 60. But for me, the reason this book, it's the shortest novel that I've written, and the reason being, in addition to wanting to tell this type of story, a lot of people might not realize that for many authors, writing novels is easier than writing short fiction, than writing short stories or novellas. There are some authors who prefer to write in the short medium and issue the longer one. And then there's those random crazy people who I'm extremely jealous of who are good at both. And I am a novel writer. I like words. I like every single word, so I try to put them in all of my books. But this, I wanted to practice. I wanted to challenge myself to see if I could tell a complete full story with the same amount of emotion that readers are used to, but in a shorter form. Because if I don't continue to try to iterate upon myself, I will become derivative, and I don't want that. I want to be able to challenge myself to try new things. So with this, I had a very specific choice when I set out to write the book. I could have either made this a super long book following a whole bunch of different people, or I could have made it a shorter story following one very specific couple. And the reason I chose that was because I worried that if I had made this longer, that it would have collapsed under its own weight, that it would have felt too oppressive. And plus, I just like to challenge myself. I like to try new things and see if I'm capable of it, because that's the only way that I'll get better as a writer.
Well, I think the form really fits what you set out to do here, because it feels like a bit of a whirlwind, like we're being carried along through this story. And whereas, you know, I've read a number of your novels, and where I just kind of want to get lost in the world, where I adore getting lost in the Cerulean world.
Yeah, there's a necessity in those kinds of books to luxuriate, to be able to have everything wash over you. But with this kind of book, I wanted to, which is why there's kind of a clock with the idea of how long that they have from the beginning of the novel to the end. But I also wanted to try to make this, I knew this was going to be a talky book where a lot of people spend a lot of time talking, but I wanted to make sure it felt like those last few weeks can go by in a blink of an eye. And they do, because that's how time works.
Well, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about the stakes and the premise. But first, if you would, just introduce folks to Rodney and Dawn.
Yeah, Rodney and Dawn are the main characters of my novel, We Burn So Bright. They are an older gay couple. They are in their 70s. They've been together for 40 years. And they, like the rest of the world at the beginning of the book, receive the news that in a few weeks' time, the world will end because of a wandering black hole that's made its way to our galaxy. And they then, at that point, set off to fulfill a promise that they made before the world ends. And the book is about the different kinds of people they meet along the way on their journey, because I'm endlessly fascinated by how I think people might react to a certain situation like that. Like, we saw at least a little bit of that during the pandemic, and
Right.
what people did or did not do during that time. But I wanted to know what it would feel like on a more massive scale, how I think people would react to receiving news that no matter what they do, no matter how hard they try, that it's not going to be enough, that it's not going to be good enough. And so what would you do during that time?
There's a huge gulf between, I kept thinking as I was reading this, between me as an individual finding out I have a month to live,
Mm-hmm.
and what would I do with that time, and absolutely everything is going to be gone in a month. Everything you know, everything that has always been, history.
Yeah, the entirety of a species, many species, but the entirety of the world that we know. It's so fascinating to me that if our world would be destroyed somehow, some way, what would be known about humanity in the universe? What would other beings think of us? Would we even be missed? Would anybody know that we existed? Are we in some weird, middle of nowhere part of the universe where we're in the boonies and nobody knows where we are?
We're a cul-de-sac, TJ.
Right, exactly. I think about that a lot. Like, I think about, we know that the universe is billions and billions of years old. For all we know, there have been civilizations that rose and fell during that time that we'll never have any indication of. And it's kind of like humanity. What if something like that happened? What would our legacy be? What would we matter to the universe?
I want to get back to the book on that, but let me ask you about Don and Rodney. In
Mm-hmm.
that, it's not usual to have queer elders as the protagonists of a book, and a lot of your writings are at least marketed to YA audiences, and so it seemed to me a very deliberate and meaningful choice that you chose queer elders to focus on.
Okay. So being a writer who dabbles in romance, I am very keenly in tune to the romance genre. Now, I want to be very clear with what I say here. This is not a knock against the romance genre. It is the biggest genre for a reason. It was a genre built by and run by women, still to this day. It is the highest selling genre in the world. It has been for decades. It probably will be for the rest of time. That is something that we all understand. What I wanted to do with this, though, is that I kind of get tired of seeing and reading books where love and romance and joy is only for young people. That if you are in your 20s, you're going to have your romance, and that's going to define the rest of your life. But love doesn't stop when in your 20s. Love doesn't disappear when you're in your 20s. It's the same idea for me about the whole coming out trope. I know those stories are vital and necessary, but coming out isn't the be all and the end all. Anybody you meet for the rest of your life is potentially someone you have to come out to. So I try to think of it like in that regard, that we should be experiencing in our books people from all walks of life, all cultures, all ages, sexualities, gender, all of that kind of thing. And the fact that I get to write characters like these queer elders who are in their 70s, who usually aren't the quote unquote heroes of the book, is wonderful for me. I love that, because let's be honest, a lot of queer youth don't know their history, about who came before them, the people who stood and marched and threw bricks and were arrested and beaten and murdered and killed and died from HIV and AIDS and all of this. They don't know the people, the history of everything. I mean, hell, let me be honest. There's a very specific mention in this book about queer history having to do with the Black Cat in Silver Lake, California. Like many queer people, I was under the impression that Stonewall was the first queer riots that we had in the United States. It wasn't until my audio narrator, Daniel Henning, who did Cerulean Sea and some of my other books, I was in Silver Lake with him at his house, and he was the one that gave me a lesson in queer history and took me to the Black Cat, which still stands to this day. It's a restaurant now, but the same sign is still there. There's plaques on the wall. There's pictures that talk about the history of this place and how this was the birthright of the LGBTQ movement. And what I love about us, about queer people, is that we love and respect and know our history, and that we get to teach it to other people. There should be an entire generation of queer elders above me, but they're gone.
Right.
And so I get to tell this story, a very deliberate choice, because I want to see my people, no matter their age, getting to be the heroes, the leads in a story like this. Because we don't get to see like that. We don't get to see older queer people be the heroes. We don't. And I wanted to change that.
And I loved how Rodney, at least in the beginning, comes across as something of a curmudgeon, but it's in that role as a queer elder, as a Seneca. He's going to be the repository of history and heritage for this queer couple that they encounter, that he really blossoms. And he loves being in that role, not so much the declaiming part, but the fact that I can provide that link for you.
And explain to them why certain words like queer, that some people have, that many people, myself included, have reclaimed as part of our vocabulary. But for many older people, that word is still mired in vitriol and anger and hatred. So I love that dichotomy of an older queer generation with a younger queer generation, not butting heads, but finding ways that they fit together like pieces of a puzzle rather than the things that separate them.
Because age is very certainly one of those many dichotomies that people draw, is like, okay, I have nothing to learn from you. You're in your 70s.
Right. And you know what? I'll be honest. When I was in my 20s, I probably thought the same exact way. But it's just one of those things. The older you get, and you hear this all the time when you're young, but the older you get, the more you start to reflect, the more you start to turn inward, rather than being, a selfish douchebag in your 20s, like many of us were. You learn and you grow and you find the things that are actually really important. I'm about to turn 44 this year. I love getting older. I would never go back to my 20s ever. And I know, especially in the gay community, the idea of getting older is, you turn decrepit and blah, blah, blah. But I love the lines on my face. I love the lines around my eyes when I smile. Because it shows the path of my life. It shows who I've been and what I'm becoming. And that's what I think is something that should be celebrated, especially about our queer elders, who deserve to see themselves told in stories just like young people do all the time.
In terms of the people they meet, it is such a fast trip, or at least it seemed that way to me, that I do not want to spoil anything, but they meet a really terrifying cross section of people. And each of those encounters is exactly what you were saying, was how would you respond? And there are people who react with fear. There are people who react with, well, let's just relax and enjoy what we have left. There are dangerous people out there
who react with violence. Yeah, absolutely. That is, look, it goes back to the pandemic. I mean, because I'm sure I don't have to remind everybody, but when we were in the pandemic, there was the whole contingent of people who were like, the vaccines are giving us robot parts and we can't wear our mask, is against my liberties, and who do you think? I'm not going to stay at home, even though that's the safest that we could do. And then we saw the people who, to be quite frank, kind of lost their minds, and I don't know that they've been recovered. I'm talking about the people who were like, ivermectin, and we're going to take all this horse stuff, and our president told us to swallow bleach and all of that kind of stuff. And I just realized how very, very easy it is to break a human. Because look, were those people outright insane? No, I don't believe so. I believe that they were scared out of their minds, and that they were looking for something, anything that they could do to make it better. And when they had their cult leader in the White House, of course, you want to look at the cult leader who's telling you what to do. And then I believe, quite honestly, that buildup of the pandemic is what led to the insurrection at the Capitol. I believe that that was a huge part of it. It was just one of those things that a whole bunch of different things coming in together to make this big, huge thing. And it fascinated me. Look, I am very fascinated by humanity. I often say that I don't like people because people are cruel and mean and vindictive, but I love humanity because humanity gave us art and music and books and movies and all this wonderful things. But at the end of the day, people are so utterly fallible to an extent that I don't realize that they understand. And when something big and scary happens that becomes our entire world, those people don't know how to react and don't know what to do. But again, that was a very interesting time for everybody in this world. I don't know that the United States specifically has reckoned with the fact that we lost 1 million people in our country during that time. Because right now, how it's been for the last 10 years is that, oh, a big scary thing happens. Okay, well, we're on to the next big scary thing. Now we're on to the next big scary thing. So we're not talking about that. Now in this country, a mass shooting happens where many people die and we're on to the next thing the next day.
Yeah.
And this idea of the world ending, the black hole, is something so massive that it cannot be ignored. But there will be people who do that anyway, because that's how brains are built.
By having septuagenarians as your protagonists, it immediately eliminates the possibility of this being an action hero story.
Right, exactly.
These two guys are not going to do something that change. Not that they could, not that anybody can, but we know from the outset that's not what this is about.
And that's what I wanted for this book. I didn't want readers to go into this with some kind of false hope that, oh, everything will be fixed by the end. I tell you on the first page that the world will end at some point in this book, because I wanted readers to sit with that, to come to terms with it in their own time over the course of the book, rather than going into the false assumption that, oh, these two older queer men are somehow going to stop a black hole from swallowing the planet. That's not how it works.
Well, in a Marvel movie, somebody would.
Right. But I think a big part of what's wrong with people today is it's part of like the 5 stages of grief, and nobody knows how to get to acceptance. They're all stuck in anger and fear. Nobody knows how to get to acceptance. And I wonder what it would take for people to reach that point.
Since you were describing yourself, it immediately put me in mind of Jerry, a passage from Jerry. And if you'll allow me, man.
Yeah.
Jerry Don blinked, looking at Rodney. The animals? And Jerry nodded. The whales, the giraffes, the insects and the birds who eat them, dogs, cats, walruses, lions, wolves, muskrats, living in ignorance about what's coming. They'll know before the end, but not like we have. They haven't spent the last 2 years holding their breaths, wondering what news is going to be given today. They know this earth just the same as we do, maybe even better. And it's said that ignorance is bliss. We know that's not true, even though we're animals. It's more of a blissful unawareness. Isn't that a gnarly way to live? I wish I could have been an animal. That level of awareness of what's coming. The animals are more in tune with the actual earth.
Right.
And so we know, you're absolutely right. We know that they will feel this coming, but it won't be until it's right here.
Yeah. So, because when you see stories, there's many studies, and you see stories coming of animals reacting right before something happens.
Yeah.
You'll see animals know an earthquake is coming. You'll see birds flying across the sky when something big is about to shift in the earth or anything like that. And whenever we talk about potential world-ending events, it's always focused on people, which is understandable because we're the intelligent species on the planet and we're at top of the food chain, whatever. But I always wonder, who would care about the animals if the world was ending? Who would care about the whales or the fleas and everything like that? Like all the little things. Think about it this way: there are new animals being discovered on our planet almost every single day. In 2026, we are still finding new species, big, small, minuscule, large, and nobody thinks about that when discussing like these kinds of things. Like, have you ever seen a post-apocalyptic movie, book, TV show say, hey, What about the animals? What are we going to do with them? You know,
how do the squirrels feel about
yes,
this?
right, exactly. And you know, it's a it kind of is a ridiculous way of thinking when facing those stakes, but at the same time, it just shows you the cross section of humans and what our priorities are, what we think is more important. Like, to be quite honest, my dog is right here. I would rather spend every day with my dog than most people in the world. And I think Jerry specifically, she's one of the last people that they speak to in this book, and she has her dog with her, Nax. And I love the fact that Jerry isn't concerned about people. She knows people. She understands how humanity works. She's seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And she has turned her attention away from people and focused on something that probably most aren't thinking about. And I love that perspective, because it shows that when bad things happen, we become inherently selfish because it's about what happened to us specifically. And that's healthy, because we should feel that way. But if that becomes all we know, we become mired in the toxicity of it, and we won't be able to recover or return. So I love the idea of people finding their priorities even at the end.
In some ways, the book is a road trip, and that's a literary and filmic trope that's been used a lot. I actually had 2 David Lynch movies in my head. I don't know.
Tell me.
The Straight Story, obviously, which is about this elderly guy taking a very slow road trip.
Yes, very slow.
And then Wild at Heart, which is manic, but is also and is an allegory of the Wizard of Oz.
Right.
But that notion that you learn about the main characters by these various encounters with the different folks. Mm-hmm. Did either of those influence you, or
David Lynch is a influence on me regardless of whether it is or not. I think that Mulholland Drive is probably one of the best films ever made, and one of the scariest non-horror films ever made. To be more honest, the inspiration behind this book came from my editor. We were editing the sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea, Somewhere Beyond the Sea. And there's a line in that book that Lucy says something to the effect of, "You can't see black holes with the naked eye." My editor, because that's what editors do, wanted to fact check it, because she had no idea about space or black holes or anything like that. And she fact checked it and said, "Yeah, you're absolutely right. And did you know that there's a 1 in a trillion chance that a black hole would make its way to our galaxy?" And in a normal person would probably say, "Oh, that's very insignificant." To me, I was like, there's a chance that something like that could happen? And that the entire novel, typically I will spend anywhere from 4-6 months to a year researching a book before I start writing. This one, I realized I knew nothing about black holes. So I read a book about black holes, realized I didn't want to do anything with the science of it. I wanted to be more allegorical, more metaphorical. So I sat down to write, and I wrote this in 3 weeks.
Seriously?
3 weeks. That's all it took for me to write this book. I wrote this in hours upon hours a day, working in a fever, all because of this one little comment my editor made. And I've never had anything like that happen before. Because usually I'm very much, I have to have as many notes as possible before I start. But this one, I just started writing and kept writing until I was done. And in fact, the majority of the book took me about a week, 8 days. It's chapter 4, Amelia's chapter, that I spent
oh my God,
probably 2 weeks on. Just that specific chapter, trying to get that right. But this book, it exists because of an offhanded comment that my editor made, which is why I dedicated the book to her, because it's her fault that this book exists.
I love the idea that at least some of this is attributable to Lucy.
Yeah, it is. The Antichrist made me destroy the world.
And there's the tag.
I never thought of it like that.
Klune says.
Yeah, right.
But the Amelia chapter is just terrifying.
I wanted, and we won't spoil it here,
yes.
but there's a very, very specific rule that is taught to young people in English classes across the world, and that is show, don't tell. And that rule really bugs the crap out of me, because sometimes showing and telling are very, very similar, and sometimes telling is just as important as showing, because it's a different form of storytelling. It's a different form of trying to put forth a story in a different kind of way. I love that. I spent so much time working on that chapter, but I love how that turned out.
Rodney and Don are on this road trip. They're on a mission, and again, no spoilers, but
Yeah.
we don't find out exactly what that mission is until the very last chapter.
Right.
How difficult was that in terms of putting the breadcrumbs, in terms of getting us a little bit per, because it's only 7 chapters.
Right.
So a little bit per chapter that keeps us aware, and then there's the big reveal at the end.
Right. So it wasn't that I was trying to play this as a narrative twist. It wasn't that I was trying to play it as a gotcha moment. What I was trying to do with this is I think about the times that I've had my own grief. And because I lost my partner in 2016, he passed away after a long illness.
Sorry.
And I remember the grief that I was in at that point, to the point where it became toxic. And I remember not wanting to talk to anybody about it. Anytime anybody brought him up, I didn't want to listen. I didn't want to talk about it. And so I thought about how that would work in this kind of a story, because grief, regardless of the fact that we all experience it at some point or another, grief is still such a taboo thing to talk about, because we don't like to talk about things that hurt us. We don't like to talk about things that make us sad. And I try to think about how 2 men who've been together for 40 years might handle grief. And I believe that there would be a lot of unspoken conversation in that point in time, each of the other person telling the other, I'm not ready for this yet. I'm not ready. And maybe not in so many words. Maybe it just could be in actions, in movement, in facial expressions. But the idea that it has to be on your terms. It has to be something when you are ready to speak of, because if you're not ready, you could get angry. It could hurt even worse. And so with these 2 men, I wanted to give the breadcrumbs for the reader to be able to follow, but I also wanted to have it to be a realistic portrayal of what not only the end of the world could look like, but the end of the world on a smaller scale to people, because the end of their world might not matter to almost anybody else in this book, because everybody's so focused, but it matters so much to them that they're so willing to do what they're doing in this. And I am constantly writing about different forms of grief, because I'm trying to understand grief. And we live long enough to learn what love is. We'll know loss at some point in our lives, but no 2 people experience it the same way. And I want to know why. I want to know why that emotion. We all know what happy people look like. We can tell what happy people look like, but it can be very difficult to look at someone and tell that they're sad. And I find that endlessly fascinating. And I don't know that I'll ever get the answers that I'm looking for, but to be able to talk about a taboo subject like that, to put it out in the open, to drag it out of the shadows and put it in the light, means that it might be easier for someone to talk about their own personal grief. And I get that. My novel, Under the Whispering Door, is a big book about grief. And I've heard from countless people all over the world sharing with me the stories of their grief, the stories they may not have told to anybody else in their life, because it's so much easier to tell a stranger something hard than it is to tell someone you love, which is a big point of contention between Rodney and Don. And I love that even at the end, they'll still have it out. They will call each other out on their BS. And I adore that about them.
Yeah, I do too. Dealing with grief is hard enough on its own, but I'll just speak for myself. There's a part of me that outside of a therapeutic relationship, I don't want to burden the other person with that.
Yeah.
They're not going to know how to respond if I talk about how desperately sad or lonely I am. Mm-hmm. They're not going to get why that was such a loss for me. Mm-hmm. So, and therapy helps, but you need to be able to, but then you get into the Don and Rodney situation of, will you just fucking say it?
Yeah. And I think that I kind of wrestled with that because I wondered if it'd be a little too much, especially towards the end of the book. But really, what better time than the end of the world to say, hey, enough. We are going to have this out regardless of what happens next. But we have to have this out, not just because the world is ending, but because our world has already ended. And we are still here. Our world has died. This is the corpse of that world. We can't resuscitate it, but we can give it a burial that is needed for not just that thing, but for ourselves. I get so frustrated when people discount their own grief, saying it's not important or anything like that, because grief doesn't come from just death. There's big grief and there's little grief. Loss of jobs, loss of opportunity, loss of friendships, loss of partners. Loss of a pet is akin to losing a family member.
Oh my goodness,
and
yeah.
Big grief and little grief, they can be very different, but we only typically focus on the big griefs, on the world-ending griefs, and not the little ones that can add up to be a big grief. And I love that both Rodney and Dawn are going through their own versions of grief, but they're still tethered together regardless of that. And they want to be, and they need to be, and they have been for decades. And this is just one more step in their relationship.
Hi folks, it's Clare with 5 reasons you should support Transqat with your donation or a sponsorship. Number 5, our company jet can't use the cheap fuel. Number 4, every time you listen but don't donate, a chipmunk tries heroin. Number 3, Transqat will never start a war in the Middle East. Number 2, the owls are not what they seem. And the number 1 reason you should support Transqat. If you don't, my cat Newt will come to your house and yak on your carpet.
Because, at least as far as we can tell from your story, they are the only 2 people on this rapidly dying planet who know this story.
Yes.
And
exactly.
So it's almost incumbent on them to use those last remaining moments
to celebrate,
to come to terms with it.
Right.
Yeah.
And to celebrate that story and to maybe give into the grief that they have bottled up for so long and that they are actively have spent time trying to avoid. I've done that. I know exactly how that feels because you tell yourself it'll be there when I want it to be.
Yeah.
You want it to be on your terms, but that's not how it works.
Grief doesn't care about your terms.
None whatsoever.
What would you do if I were to tell you that not just you and I are gonna die at the end of the week? Oh my God, it's Friday. It's the end of the week today. Sorry. But not just you and I, but absolutely everything is going to die by the end of today.
Yeah.
How you want to spend your day?
I would call my family, and then I would go out into the woods with my dog. I live in the Cascade Mountains in Washington State, outside of a little tiny town. I live in a log cabin in the mountains, and looking out my window right now, it's a salt forest. And I would take my dog. I love being in the woods. It's my favorite place in the world. I would just go and walk in the woods and listen to the birds and listen to the sounds of the wind through the trees and remind myself that maybe I didn't always do good, but I think I gave myself enough credit that I tried my hardest. I tried my hardest at the end, and I would just be thankful for the time that I have. Given the loss of my partner 10 years ago, I no longer fear death. I have come to terms with it. It's just a natural part of living. Once you are known to be alive, there will be at some point where you will no longer be alive. And I don't know what happens when we close our eyes. I don't know where we go or what we do. But you know what? We'll all find out one day. And it's not, yes, it's scary, and yes, it's sad, and yes, it's horrifying to think that maybe we won't be here anymore. But if we did our best, then that should be enough to be our legacy.
What you've put out into the world is one hell of a legacy so far.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I all I've ever wanted ever since I was a kid is to read books with people like me in them. Yeah. I never got to, when I was a kid, it was all straight people teaching, or the gay people existing to teach straight people a very valuable lesson, or it was HIV and AIDS fiction memoirs, which were vitally necessary at the time, or we were in books like The Front Runner by Patricia Nell Warren, where there was a gay couple in the center of it, which was written in the 70s, and at the very end, one member of this couple is murdered, and that's the end of the book. And I never wanted to read or write anything like that. I wanted to write where people like me got to experience the highs and lows of life, and at the very end get to be happy. And in this case, I wanted to redefine what happiness looks like at an ending, because happiness doesn't always necessarily mean that everything is hunky-dory. Happiness might mean acceptance. Happiness might mean finding little moments of joy even at the end.
Yeah, it might mean sitting silently and listening to all of those sounds in nature that aren't ever going to be heard again, and just appreciate them.
There's a very specific scene that I loved in this book where Rodney goes on a long rant about how he's going to miss apples, how he never thought about apples in any other way other than the fact that they're apples. But now that he knows that he's no longer going to be able to have an apple, that's all he can think about. And I find that endlessly fascinating. That I would be the same way. I would be thinking, oh no, I don't have enough Reese's peanut butter cups. I need to go get some. That's my favorite thing in the world.
King size, right?
Yes. And you know what? Hell, it's the end of the world. I'd go buy one of those huge oversized ones that you just gnaw, and be walking through the woods just gnawing on this big chocolate peanut butter thing.
All right. My dearest friend eats them where she nibbles off the chocolate all the way around. It's just wrong. It's morally repellent, Karen, is what I'm saying.
Those are like the people who have Kit Kats and then just bite into the whole thing rather than breaking them apart.
Yeah, come on.
You crazy weirdos.
I mean, we're trying to be tolerant here, but...
Right, exactly. But there are some
lines.
things that cross the line.
I do want to, if you'll allow me, I'd love to ask you a couple of questions about some of the other things that you've written. But before I go, I was wondering if there was a passage that you wanted to read.
No, because I want my readers to experience this firsthand and naturally. I think that I will say this. I want my readers to get to chapter 4 and to take a break. Take a break before you do it. Or hell, I'm going to give some advice that I've never given with regards to one of my books. Read a chapter a day on this book. Read a chapter a day and think about, there's only, like you said, there's only 7 chapters. Read a chapter a day and sit with that chapter for a day and see what you think, and then go on to the next and go on to the next, and just really soak in what each of the chapters is mean, because each chapter is a different kind of story. One's a horror story, one's about marriage, one's about queer history, one's about hippies. And I want readers who I know are going to ignore this completely and read it all in one sitting. That's fine. But I would love if someone would just pick this up and read it one chapter at a time and think about what each chapter means specifically.
I'm going to go back and reread it that way.
Yeah, I think it would be very interesting to do it that way. So that way you're not getting everything all at once. You're sitting with it and you're giving yourself context for what each chapter means. And if you would agree with what the people do in each chapter, what would you do in that situation? You know, that's what I want people to think of. Is anybody in this book wrong for what they do?
At the very least, never mind would you do this, but at the very least, can you understand where they're coming from?
And can you understand the why of it? And I think that's a big problem with humanity, is that we never want to understand or even listen to the why. We always want to have the reactionary, how dare you do blah, blah, blah. And we are so endlessly complex as a species, and no two people react to this kind of thing the same way.
Well, thank goodness, at least we live in a world where we have not invented something that is an outrage engine, where people are rewarded. I would hate to live in a world like that.
Oh no! Truth, reality is sinking in. Ow! Ow!
I object to... Oh, shut up.
Oh my goodness.
I'm actually a retired teacher, but I have a job in this ridiculously large used bookstore complex down here in Southern Connecticut. 3 locations. We buy 12 to 15,000 used books a week.
I love it.
And this is not being a fangirl, but every single time that I buy a copy of this from somebody, I hug it in front of them. And
demand
anybody
to know why they're selling it.
Yeah, right. That's the next question. But anybody who is selling it back has read it and they understand immediately. You can see it in their face. Yep, I get it.
Yeah.
That is how dear this book is to me. And so I wanted to say, first of all, thank you for Chauncey.
Hey, man. Look. Okay, Chauncey's my boy. You don't understand how many crocheted Chaunceys that I've been given, and it is my favorite thing in the world. Chauncey is my favorite character I've ever written. I adore him.
Yeah, you must hear that all the time, I'm guessing, because he's...
Well, I was just at the Tucson Festival of Books last weekend. It's a big book festival in Tucson, Arizona. It usually has about 200,000 people come. So I want you to know it was a very big event. It's outdoors, and so there's huge crowds. And I walked into the event, just getting there. I hadn't even gotten my name tag, and all of a sudden I hear someone yell my name. I turn around, and there's a woman running up to me with a Chauncey plushie that she made. And she gifted it to me. She crocheted it herself. He has a little jacket, a little bellhop cap, everything like that. People know, especially if they've heard me talk before, people know how desperately I love Chauncey and that I would do anything for him. I remember once I was meeting with some Hollywood executives, and they were trying to pitch me to allow them to make the House in the Cerulean Sea movie, and the main producer guy, because I was on the call with him and his assistants, and the main producer guy goes, so we may have to have conversations about wanting to keep this budget friendly, and so to do so we'd probably want to consider cutting one of the kids. What would you think about if we cut Chauncey out of the movie? And later his assistant emailed me after the conversation and goes, you know how you read in books where the blood drains from someone's face? I've never seen that in person before until it happened to you. He goes, I knew at that moment in time that we were not going to be working together. And I said, no, we are not.
That's the Chauncey bit aside, that's a legitimate issue, though, is that I would love to see this on the screen, but you've got a Phoenix and you've got Chauncey and you've got,
Well, I will say this. Stick around for the next couple of months. You guys are probably going to get a very, very cool announcement. And I will say this, it will be animated. Disney had bought the rights for it for 3 years. When it first came out, they wanted to make a live action TV show for Disney Plus. And then Bob Iger, the head of Disney, came out and said, you know what? No, I don't want to do this. And so then the rights reverted back to me. We found a good home for it now, and pretty soon we'll be making a very, very, very cool announcement about it.
Please let us know, and I'll.
Oh goodness, you guys are gonna. I've been working quietly behind the scenes for the past 9 months, and I cannot wait for people to see what we've been working on.
In my most sincere tone, thank you for the afterword in the sequel.
Thank you.
I as I was reading it, I understood what you were doing. I saw the allegory with this author, but to read the afterword where you were very upfront about things and how abhorrent, not the person, but the views of that person are, I'm grateful to you.
Thank you for saying so. One of the very first people I met in the community was a drag queen who was also happened to be trans. And this was back in the early 2000s. So we weren't, as PC as we are now. And she used she, her pronouns, referred to herself as a transsexual. And, that is nomenclature that obviously is beyond. But That was you have to understand, I grew up in rural Oregon in the 80s and 90s in a very small podunk trailer trash town. And then when I was 16, we moved to the big city, Tucson, Arizona. And that is where the first time I had actual spice in food. And two, that was my first exposure to the queer community, because when I was 18, I did what most 18-year-olds would do, got a really bad fake ID, tried to get into the gay bar, was told by the bouncer that he would let me in, even though my fake ID portrayed me to be a middle-aged Middle Eastern man, I believe. And he goes, if I catch you with a drink in your hand before you turn 21, you'll be banned from here for a life. I basically blubbered my thank you, went inside, bumped into the drag queen, and got adopted by drag queens almost immediately. And they're the ones that taught me about gender, about trans issues, about drag, about all of this. And look, I was 18, 19, 20. I wasn't the most centered person. I was just coming out. I came out with a chip on my shoulder because family had hated who I was for a long time. And I was in the stage where I was like, well, screw all of you. You don't know me. But I grew up. I mean that. My queerness grew up surrounded by people who were different from me. And I could not have imagined a better group of people to teach me about the world. And as I get older and I hear certain authors of the British variety coming out and basically attacking some of the most vulnerable people in the world, I don't play like that. I don't. I remember what I was taught when I was young by people from this community, and I realize more and more that I need to use my platform not only to speak up for what's important to me, but for what's important to my community, especially because the trans community is one of the most marginalized in the world. And yet, for some reason, there are some half-wits out there who think the best thing to do is punch down. And I will not stand for that. I will not do that. I have very little room in my life for any form of transphobia in any way, shape, or form. Because look, without trans people, we wouldn't be here. That's just how it is. Trans people have done everything for us. They have always been here. They will always be here. And the fact that we can sit here and have entire states go after one kid who's trying to play a sport, where these states are ranked last in houselessness, in education, in food insecurity, but they're still abortion. They're still focused on this one kid who wants to play soccer, not the women who are dying in hospitals because the doctors can't give them abortions, not people in social services who are underpaid, not teachers who are extraordinarily underpaid. We focus on one kid who's trying to live their life. That I don't play like that. I do not. I'll say this. I was in West Virginia in a very rural setting, speaking to a school. There's a school there in a very rural place that has their entire school is in one building, 6th through 12th grade, or at kindergarten through 12th grade. And so I spoke to the 6th graders and up, and I told myself that this might be the first time that anybody here is seeing a real live queer person, somebody who's out, somebody who can talk about it. So I use that word queer multiple times. Afterwards, the librarian who invited me came up to me and said, we may have a problem. The school board is very upset that you use the word queer because it might have offended someone. Not that it did, but it could possibly have offended someone. And in my head, I was thinking, you heterosexual douchebags, what are you doing? What is this?
You know what phrase upsets me is war in Iran.
Yeah, right.
I find that really offensive, and I would like it if we could just no longer have war in Iran, because you're hurting my feelings.
Right, but what mattered the most was after that, I was told that I got to meet with some of the kids, and I had a 12-year-old boy come up to me and say, I know all about the gay stuff. And I said, what do you mean, tiny little 12-year-old boy? And he looked me straight in the eye and said, last year I had a girlfriend. He came out as trans, and now he's my boyfriend. That's it. That's how simple it was. If it is that easy for a 12-year-old, what the hell is wrong with adults? What is wrong? What is wrong? If it is so easy for a kid to be that accepting, then we are doing it wrong. We are absolutely doing it wrong. Kids today are smarter, more empathetic, more worldly than we ever were at their age, and they are going to fix so many broken things. And when I tell every young person, every group of young people I speak to, I tell them this. I say, this is going to be blunt. Some of you might not like it, but I'm going to say it anyway. One day, all of these old white people in power are going to die. You're going to be the next ones to come up and change the world. Don't forget that, because life is finite. Their lives are finite as hell. And one day soon, they're going to be gone, and it's going to be up to us. It's going to be up to you to be able to make that change.
So start thinking about it now. What can you?
What change do you want to see in the world to make it better for you and people around you?
Your story about the meeting the drag queen in the gay bar is very much what Cerulean is about, in that it's about found family. It's about, when I'm describing it to somebody who hasn't read it, I keep referencing the Island of Misfit Toys. You know, it's the adopted kids that nobody wants. And
it's discussed in We Burn So Bright, but I think it's important to show that it's relegated to the House in the Cerulean Sea too. There was a movement especially during the HIV and AIDS timeline, where there were kids orphan kids who had disabilities, kids with Down syndrome, kids with cerebral palsy. There were kids with mental health issues, kids who had been born from trauma, very significant trauma. And these are kids that nobody wanted. These are kids that the straight couples did not want. Straight couples typically, especially during that time, and I'm sure it's probably the same even now, wanted babies. They wanted babies so they could pass off babies as their own. And I get that. I understand the logic behind it. But there was a movement done by social workers in the 80s and 90s where same-sex couples were sought out to adopt the kids that nobody else wanted. There were so many same-sex couples that took in the kids that had been abused, that had disabilities, that had mental health issues, because nobody would take them. And you know who did? Gay couples, because they were told no time and time and time again to be able to adopt what society deemed as a quote-unquote normal child. And the fact that so many of us don't know that, don't realize that there was this entire quiet, silent movement done by social workers who saw how much same-sex couples would love the kids regardless of who the kids were. And that just, to me, that is the epitome of the queer community. We are the type of people who take misfit toys and take them to our island and say, here's where you get to be free. Here's where you get to run around. Here's where you get to be who you are and find out who you will be. And I think it's so important to remember that even when our men were dying in the 80s and 90s, we were still trying to look out for other people. So many people don't know that it used to be GLBT, and the reason it is now LGBTQ is because the lesbians were some of the only people who came and sat with the dying gay men in the hospitals when they were dying. So since they put us first, we put them first in the acronym. So that is why it's LGBTQ. It's little things like that I think it's so important for people to know that, yes, we've always been here. Yes, a large part of our history is suffering, but we have done so much good for so many people.
And that little corner of queer history, that adoption story, is just as unfamiliar as having a couple in their 70s be the protagonist.
Yeah.
That's not something I've run across. Yeah. I mean, I know it from reading my history, but I don't think I've ever seen it in a novel before.
I haven't either. And that's really why I wanted to push that in there, because I'm trying to entertain readers. I'm trying to make them cry. Let's be honest a little bit. But I also want them I also want them to learn a little something that they may not have known. You know, you can read to escape, and I do that all the time. But even when you're escaping, you can learn something new that maybe you didn't before. That's what I love about books. It gives us a minute to walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. And I find that endlessly fascinating.
I realize that your time is limited here. We could just go on doing this.
Oh, I have ADHD. I can talk for days.
and when you come to the East Coast next, you and I are going to go have a conversation about David Lynch.
Oh my goodness, we will. So did you watch, before I let you go, did you watch have you seen Twin Peaks? I'm assuming you have.
Oh, goodness,
okay.
Yes.
And did you see the 18 episode series he did before he died with Laura Dern and all of that and all of that? I have never been so enthralled and also not understood what was going on at the same time.
Somebody who actually really didn't survive my transition as a friend, but we had been big Peaks fans back when it was coming out, texted me during one of the episodes and said, it's really only David Lynch who would have me watch somebody sweep a floor for 4 minutes straight.
Yeah. And it was totally, it's enthralling in ways that anybody else tried that, I would be bored out of my mind. But it's David frickin' Lynch, man.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was just extraordinary. Yes, I will, when I come back to the East Coast, I will have this conversation with you for as long as you want, because I have so many thoughts about David Lynch. Tell
folks when they can get this, and then last word goes to you. Why should they get this?
So this We Burn So Bright comes out April 28th, 2026 from Macmillan and Tor. The audiobook is read by the indomitable Kurt Graves, who has done some of my other books. And you should get this because even though this book is sad, this book is also filled with hope like you wouldn't believe. I wanted to make sure that even though I'm ending the world, that the human spirit, the human concept that we have, the only species that we know to have it of hope, will never die, will never, ever die. There's a very quiet moment in the book where some of the characters discuss the Voyager satellites that we sent out, the golden discs. If you have never researched those, I highly suggest that you look up what is on those discs and listen to some of the things on these discs. And you will think to yourself, at least I hope you will, that my God, we are such a beautiful, beautiful thing.
If you enjoyed today's episode, and I know I did, check out earlier conversations with authors. Episode 107 was with Rhea Brodell on their Butch Heroes books. In episode 96, I spoke with Sarah Miller about her book, Hick, the Trailblazing Journalist Who Captured Eleanor Roosevelt's Heart. And number 84 was with Angela Wick about her fantasy series, I Left My Hormones in Another World. Coming up next on Transqat is a discussion of all things bi. I'm joined by Sherry Lucas and Amanda Redfern.
The other one that I refer to quite a bit is from 1990, from the Bisexual Manifesto, which was written in the Bay Area Bisexual Network. And it's arguing that bisexuality has always been about being attracted to all genders. Bisexuality is a whole, fluid identity. Do not assume that bisexuality is binary or duogamous in nature, that we have two sides or that we must be involved simultaneously with both genders to be fulfilled human beings. In fact, don't assume that there are only two genders.
This has been Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. Thank you for listening. Let's talk soon.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece.
And you've just been listening to Transqat. It is made by one of my favorite people in the world, Claire McCarthy.
Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC.
Copyright 2023, all rights reserved.
Join us on the web at transqat.com.
That's TRANSQAT.com.
QAT.com.
QAT.com.
There you'll find links to Transqat, the blog,
writing projects,
speaking engagements,
and our PayPal donations page.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monkeys.
Monies.
Your monies.
Your monies.
Not monkeys.
Please consider supporting our mission with your monies. Any monkeys will be gratefully received as well.
Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
On TikTok, we are at The Real Transqat.
Want to tell your story on air?
Or ask Claire a question?
What is the deal?
She has all the answers.
Or suggest a guest or topic for an upcoming episode.
Use the contact page at the website
or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com.
crmtranscat@gmail.com.
And thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Bye.